everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today we've got the Walther PK380 pistol. This is a hammer-fired polymer pistol, single stack, chambered in 380. One of the things that Walther does that a lot of other companies don't seem to do as much is Walther will cater to various niche markets. They'll look for small target markets that may need something special in a pistol. The real target market for this one is people that have less strong hands, less strong wrists and arms, and need a very light slide and reduced recoil. And this gun does target that area. There's a few compromises that we'll talk about as we get into it, but overall it's a perfect little gun for somebody in that position. It's going to be reliable, and it does use a reliable cartridge. So let's go ahead and talk about this gun a little bit. First thing we'll do is show that it's unloaded. Okay, a few things about this gun is that we'll talk about the size. It's 6.5 inches front to back, 5.2 inches tall with the magazine installed, and 1.2 inches thick. So as carry pistols go, it's a little bit on the thicker side of some of the single stacks. But it's only 18 ounces with an empty magazine, so it's extremely light. You've got a little over 1 pound with an empty magazine for the gun itself. The big claim to fame on this is how well it manages recoil, and it does manage recoil very well. The 380 doesn't have an excessive recoil to start with, but this gun makes even the 380 recoil very mild. It almost gets into feeling more like a 22 than a 380 when you fire it. And the slide cycling is extremely light. With the hammer back, it's just ridiculously light to pull the slide back. Just a little bit of hang up as it starts to tilt the barrel, but anybody can cycle this slide, and even with the hammer down, it's still lighter than any of the other pistols out there. So like the CCP, which Walther had done to reduce the slide, the tension on the slide and reduce the recoil, they made a few compromises. One of the compromises is there's no external slide release. So if you put a magazine in it, an empty magazine, it will lock back. So it locks back for chamber in the first round. It also locks back after the last round is fired. But there's no way, if I were to install a loaded magazine in here, there's no way for me to release it by hand. If it does have a loaded magazine in it, pulling back on the slide and letting go like any other gun will chamber it. But if there's an empty magazine in it and it's locked back and I want to release it, I have to take the magazine out and then pull back and I can release it. It does have a small paddle style release right here. So you just reach in with either finger. It is ambidextrous. Push down on this little paddle release to eject the magazine. And it does work very well. It's a little different if you're used to the button. You sit there pushing on it, it's not going to do anything. But once you get used to it, it's very intuitive and very easy to operate. It does have an external safety, and it's ambidextrous. It's on both sides. This is the fire position. Put it down into safe position. It's a little more cumbersome because you kind of have to reach your hand back and flick it off. But if you're going to the safe position, it's because you're done shooting, so that's not as much of an issue. Taking it off safe is very easy. You simply flick it up with your thumb, and it's ready to go. It is a drop-safe weapon. I'll show you when I get the slide apart. It does have the striker or the firing pin block. And overall, it's been a very pleasant weapon to shoot. It's ergonomically very comfortable. It fits in your hand well. The finger grooves are defined enough to give you a little bit of purchase on it, but not so defined that it bites into your fingers if they're not the exact right size. The only criticism I might have for it is that the grip, though it does have some decorations on it, it's relatively smooth. So if your hands were getting really sweaty, especially if you were a little bit weaker, you might have a little trouble keeping it positioned. You might end up finding you fire it and then you have to reseat your grip. But it is a comfortable grip. It fits well in the hand, and it's suitable for somebody with large or small hands. The trigger on this is a DASA. So the initial trigger pull in double action mode is right around 11 pounds. And in single action mode, it's right around 4 pounds. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate the trigger. I'm going to take the magazine out so every time I cycle it doesn't lock back on me, because if it does, there's no way to reset it. Right now I have the hammer back, so it's in single action mode. and there's a little bit of take-up, but it's extremely light take-up. It's just a very light, gentle take-up. And then I'll pull my finger back a little bit, an extremely short, crisp break. It's very light, very short, very crisp, very little creep. When it comes back out again, now the hammer is down, so I'm in double action mode, and you've got a relatively long, somewhat creepy pull back, and as you get close to the break, it does tend to stack, and it's very difficult at this point to figure out where the break is. So the double action trigger on this is not the best. I've had better double action triggers. It's a little bit hard to gauge how it's going to fire in the double action mode. But in the single action mode, or for example, if it had fired in double action and now it cycles, that single action trigger is superb. Short, crisp, and quite nice. Now, one of the things that I will tell you about this is the way the safety operates on this. The safety on this doesn't interfere with the operation of the trigger, it merely blocks the firing pin. So if I were to put the gun on safe, I can still fire it in that it goes through the motions of firing. You hear the firing pin drop, it does everything, or the hammer drop, and it does everything it would if it fires, but it won't actually fire, and I'll show you why when I get it apart. That can be a little disconcerting when you're at the range if you're not paying attention, or even in a self-defense scenario. You might think you've got a bad round or some other defect, but in reality you had it on safe and it was unable to hit the firing pin. The reset on this trigger, which I'll show you, I'm going to go ahead and I'll fire it, hold it back, cycle it. It does have a relatively short reset. There's a little bit, the reset's a little bit light, hard to detect, so I did tend to over travel a little bit, but it does have a nice short reset and stays in that single action mode after you pull the trigger. So once you get this thing into single action mode, you've actually got quite a nice trigger. Now, as far as getting it into single action mode after you've loaded it and chambered around, of course the hammer's going to be back. The Walther's instructions on how to decock it is to make sure it's in the safe position. So I've got the hammer back, make sure it's in the safe position, point it in a safe direction, hold the hammer, pull the trigger, and slowly lower the hammer. Now, theoretically that's perfectly safe because the way the safety works on this, it is a little bit disconcerting though to pull the trigger on a live round. But if it's in safe and you've confirmed it's in safe, there is no way for the firing pin to hit the primer, so it is safe to decock it in that way. That can be a little bit difficult for somebody with weaker hands to coordinate the holding of the gun, pulling the trigger, and lowering the hammer. That's probably the only thing about this gun that somebody with weaker hands would have a problem with. So now let's go ahead and talk about takedown. This is another one of the compromises Walther has made to try to get this very slimline, light, easy to handle gun, is the takedown procedure unfortunately does require a tool. And the tool does come with it. It's this little plastic thing with a tongue on it. And you can see that there's a little bit of a tongue, and if I turn it, it's got like a fork on it on the end. And in the gun itself, and I'll see if I can get this on camera, you're going to see that right inside of here, there's a little bar. And it's kind of hard to get it to show up on camera, but when you look at it there, you can see it right there, that little bar by the white tip. All you're going to do is take this tool in the upright position, I get where you can see it, the tool in the upright position, put it in so that that fork goes across that little bar, and then rotate it counterclockwise, not quite a half turn. It kind of goes about 130 some degrees. And that releases the slide lock. And the whole purpose for this tool is to make sure that when you're firing it, that the takedown lock doesn't fall loose. And it's also important to know that it has to be decocked. If not, as soon as you pull down on the release, the slide will want to shoot off. Once you've pulled that, rotated this around, you simply pull down on the takedown release. You just pull it down. You'll notice as soon as I did that, the slide kind of moved forward a little bit. Slide the slide off. Very easy to disassemble. One of the things that's a little bit different with this particular polymer pistol is it feels like the frame is actually heavier than the slide. I think they're roughly equal. And in a lot of the other polymer pistols like the Glock and some of the others, the slide assembly with barrel is drastically heavier than the rest of the gun. what they've done is they've moved a lot of the operating mechanism and weight and robustness into the frame to get to that very light slide so they can use a lighter spring and get that very easy to pull. Internally to this, it's got some nice robust rails, front and rear, and you'll see they're steel rails. So it's got a very robust guide system for the slide, and of course the trigger, sear, and hammer mechanism are back here. Unlike some of the other polymers, this does not have interchangeable grips or grip panels. What you see is what you get. I'll set that aside for the moment and then talk about the slide. The slide is relatively light and it is drop safe. I had mentioned that it has the drop safety. There's the plunger for it, and that's operated by the trigger mechanism. And on the safety, the way this safety works, instead of interrupting the trigger and sear mechanism, the safety works by having a rotating block. It's kind of hard to get it to see. Even when I'm looking at this in person, it's a little bit hard to see it. But effectively, when it's in the safe position, part of the safety that rotates around protrudes further than the firing pin. So if the hammer falls, there, we got it to focus. If the hammer falls, it's going to hit the metal of the safety rather than hitting the firing pin. And when it's in the fire position, it's a little bit flatter, and it allows the hammer to reach the firing pin. So their decocking mechanism is safe because it can't hit the firing pin. Even though at that point you would have pulled the trigger, so you will have deactivated the drop safety temporarily during that procedure. Removing the guide rod and spring is easy, but it's important to note it's not a captive spring. So you need to make sure you have good grip on it as you're taking it out. It does want to become a projectile. So you grab a hold of it, pull up, and guide it out. And you'll have your steel guide rod with its associated spring. Then barrel removals, same as most any other polymer pistol. It's got a very similar barrel block mechanism. It's got a nice feed ramp, slightly polished but not overly polished. And it has a 3.66-inch barrel, which is actually a reasonably good sized barrel for this type of handgun. You see it's in 380 auto. And then the slide itself is steel. It's painted or coated, and you will find that as it operates, some of the coating on the inside will scrape off. You can see it along the edge. This gun was new, and it was loaned to me by a local viewer, and they've only got a few hundred rounds through it. This will scrape off as the gun operates, but it doesn't seem to hinder it in any way, and it doesn't seem to progress around the slide into other parts of the gun. So just know that you're going to get some wear inside that you can't see when it's reassembled. Now, reassembly is almost easy. The first thing you would do is drop the barrel back in, and then you got to deal with this. Now, there's a couple different ways I've seen this done. Put it on the edge of a table and push in, things like that. Pretty much what I do with it is there's a hole right here that you're going to guide it into. And actually, before I go any further, there's an important little note I need to show you, and let's see if I can get this to focus on camera. If you look at the front of the barrel, the chamber actually, right in the barrel locking block, there's a little shelf there. So right here there's a little shelf. When you put the spring back in, it has to sit on the edge of this shelf. It can't go all the way down flush with the barrel. It's got to sit on the shelf. And you're going to see when I put this in here, it takes a little bit of force to get it in, and it's going to have a tendency to go all the way down. Then you'll need to make sure that you lift it up a little bit and snap it into position. If you fail to do that, when you go to reassemble it, it won't want to go all the way back, and you'll notice as you push that the guide rod will start to protrude out the front. If it does that, just slide it back off and fix that. So drop the barrel in. Now, the easiest way I found to do this spring, and this unfortunately is not easy to do for somebody with weaker hands, is to kind of crawl the spring back using your hands, which is kind of just crawling it back till there's some of the guide rod exposed. Then stick the front of the guide rod in that hole, and once you've got it in the hole, then the spring will guide through and I know my hand's blocked it, it's very tough to do. Once you've got that through the hole, the spring will guide, you'll be able to guide the guide rod through the hole and retain the spring, and then put it in position. And you'll see I've got some guide rod protruding. So at this point I have pushed it too far down. So I'm going to lift it up a little bit. And the easiest way to do that is I'm going to put my finger right here so that I can control how far up it goes, and then just pull up on it a little bit, which again is a little bit difficult to show on camera. And you heard it click. I'm pulling up on it, I can't even see what I'm doing, which is unimportant. You just have your finger there to block it and start pulling up on it. And when you pull it up enough, you'll hear it click. And that means it kicked back, and now it's sitting on that shelf. So you can see it's sitting nicely on that shelf right there. And you'll notice that the guide rod is now only minimally protruding. So now it's properly installed. Go from the edge, so you just a little bit of protrusion. What I find is it's pretty much 100% of the time, maybe 99% of the time, put it back together, you're going to push it down too far. Put your finger there, lift it up a little bit, hear it snap, center it, and you're good to go. Once you've accomplished that, it's easy to reassemble. Line the guides up, slide it back on, oops. See how the guide rod protruded? That means I didn't have it perfectly centered. So I make sure I push it down, it's sitting perfectly centered and flat on the shelf. And redo it. That time it just slid on, nothing protruded out, I didn't have to put any force on it. So I'm just sliding it back. Put this up until it locks, it just kind of clicks in place. Rotate this back clockwise till it's back up and down. You see there's the angle. And pop it out. The magazine, I did fail to mention that the magazine holds 8 plus 1 in the pipe, and you can carry this DA or SA. And now that I've reassembled it, of course, I cycle it, you see the hammer come back, fire, everything's working. The gun is staying, cycling properly and working the way it needs to. Overall, as compromises go, trying to cater towards a market that could not necessarily fire a Glock or something like that, it is a very well constructed, well designed, perfect solution for that. One of the things about it though, typically the 380 is found in very small guns. This isn't exceptionally small, it's very light, 18 ounces, but I happen to have a Glock 26 here, which is Glock's baby Glock. Now this one does happen to have a Crimson Trace laser on it, and it is of course unloaded. But what you're going to see is, from a size perspective, the PK380 is really about the same size as a Glock 26, and from a slide width perspective they're almost the same at 1.2 inches. The only thing that the PK380 has over the Glock is shorter grip. Now the Glock is a 9mm and holds 10 plus 1. So from a size perspective, if you're looking for a smaller gun, you can get guns smaller than this or equivalent to this in more capable calibers. But the slide on the Glock 26, though not heavy, is very difficult for some people with weaker hands or weaker wrists to cycle. And the recoil on the Glock 26 is far more significant than the recoil on the PK380. The only other big thing that the PK380 has going for it is the price. You can find it in the low 300s, brand new, fairly easily. It was a pleasure to shoot at the range. It was reliable, it worked well, it was easy to shoot well. It does have fairly nice sights. They're a 3-dot format with reverse contrast on the front sight, which is a little bit unique. The post is white or silver and the dot is black. But they're very easy to acquire on the range, very easy to see. And once you had it in single action mode, which of course can also be accomplished by cocking the trigger yourself. Once in single action mode, it has a very nice trigger. So overall, I would recommend it if you're somebody that is looking for a gun in this category, or you're trying to find a gun for somebody with weaker hands. It would actually work quite well. Hang on for some more range footage. If you like our videos, give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, and have a great day. Thank you.